Close-up photography is a really exciting form of nature photography which holds a vast world of promise because unlike wildlife photography, you don't have to find yourself somewhere in Kenya or Tanzania or even in a nature reserve in Europe or England or America. You can find a world of wildlife and of adventure and safari right in your back garden. If you're so inclined, you can even bring your subjects indoors and photograph inside. It's that much more accessible than other forms of wildlife photography where you just need a boatload of equipment and access to unique places in wildlife to be able to get really good imagery. So you go ahead and you buy yourself a macro lens and you head out into your local woods or even your back garden, and then you kind of realize close-up photography is actually sort of hard. There's the whole lack of depth of field thing to start with, the difficulty of focusing with such a minimal depth of field, the fact that your subjects move as if they're in a hurricane force wind. Who knew that a little flower would be so difficult to focus on because even with a breath of wind, it just moves. And then there's the problem that the macro lens creates this black hole kind of vortex that just sucks in as much light as possible. So 90% of the time your photographs are either too dark or you just can't get enough light on them to be able to get a hand-holdable shutter speed. So lighting is one of those critical issues when it comes around to close-up photography. Talk to any serious macro photographer and it isn't the lenses that they're going to be talking about or even the camera necessarily. It's the way they light their subjects because it's that much more complicated than shooting your standard landscape or even wildlife photography where there aren't flashes involved. So lighting becomes absolutely critical when you're trying to photograph the close-up world. This is particularly the case as the close-up world tends to be under foliage, in trees, where it's already dark. So being able to take a photograph up close is going to be that much more difficult without supplemental lighting. Now, there are two primary reasons why we have to introduce light when we're photographing the small subjects, and it has to do with the actual physics of photographing the small world. Basically, as you focus closer, your aperture is going to get effectively smaller, meaning that there's less light hitting the sensor. So again, it's going to get a lot darker inside the camera as we focus closer to the subject matter that we're trying to photograph. The second reason also aligns to the fact that we are trying to photograph the small world. The depth of field is infinitesimally small, to the point that at life-size magnification, if you are focusing on an insect, you're at f16, you're getting about 1.6 millimeters in focus. That's your depth of field, or at least the plane of depth of field. So to be able to get anything in focus without stacking your images, you have to use very, very small apertures, which once more means that you have to have a lot of light. Then there's another reason, and that's creative. Basically, if you're photographing something, you want to light it creatively to be able to showcase what it looks like. Now, if you're going for the scientific approach, obviously a flat ring light effect is absolutely fine. But if you're trying to portray the wonder of the small world, the natural world up close, then sometimes using lighting in a creative way, in exactly the same way that you would do portrait lighting, for instance, that's going to influence how we photograph our subject. And again, supplemental lighting is very, very important because once more, if you're photographing in a foresty scene like I am here, near where I live in Durban, the issue is that you just have flat lighting. So to be able to create more three-dimensional lighting and creative lighting, we have to introduce supplemental lighting in some way. Several years ago, I put together a video which I will link to in the top right-hand corner over here, where I used Leophoto arms and a conventional flash gun with a diffuser in the front of it to be able to create these macro photographs. Now, the advantage of a flash gun is obviously that it puts out a huge amount of power. The disadvantage of a flash gun, though, is that it is big and cumbersome, and very often if you're working with such a large rig, you're going to scare away your subjects long before you even get close enough to photograph them. Which brings me to the subject of today's video, the Adaptalux Lighting Rig. Now, Adaptalux promises to be something a little bit more svelte, a little bit smaller, and a little bit easier to use. And it is this unit with its myriad arms that you can attach to it that can light up a subject. And in theory, it should allow you to be able to be really precise in how you place your lights and light your subject in the small world. So the question that I'm going to try and answer today is this an effective lighting solution for photographing the macro world? When I first started doing macro photography in the late 90s, there was a whole myriad number of lighting solutions that were out there, from truly simple, just simply putting a flash on the top of your camera, through to really complex units from Novoflex in particular, that had big power packs that had to be attached to the mains, and had, again, this concept that you could have little lights through fiber optics that could light up your subject matter. And that was great if you were photographing in the studio, but it was very difficult if you were photographing out in the wild like we are today. Fast forward to the digital era, and lighting has gotten a lot smaller, lighter, cheaper as well. And it's all thanks in main part to the invention and advent of LED lights. Flashes, as I have mentioned, are big and cumbersome. There are a couple of specialist units out there that promise to be smaller and more svelte, but there's no such thing as a real one-trick pony when it comes round to lighting. And of course, if you're in macro flash lighting, you realize that there's a specialist kind of light for literally just about everything. Now, Adaptalux have brought out this unit, which is essentially a brain with the power box inside it, and the ability to plug in up to 5 independent lighting arms that can move about, flex, and be positioned carefully into your scene so that you are able to light your subject with more accuracy. Now, bear in mind, I only have the starter unit here. This is the basic setup that Adaptalux produces, and it consists of, as I said, the brain itself, which is the Adaptalux unit, and then 2 lighting arms which produce a white light. There are more complex kits on the market, including xenon flashes, which also connect to the same ports at the front and then produce a much more powerful burst of light compared to the LED lighting that these little arms produce. Bear in mind when I say that this is the starter unit that Adaptalux don't recommend that this be used out in the wild. They actually market this as something to be used inside a studio, or for photographing flowers, or for photographing, I suppose, mushrooms and fungi, but nothing that actually moves. They're still kind of expecting that the photographer is going to have the camera set up on a tripod and isn't necessarily going to be hand holding this. I am actually putting this small basic unit through paces that it wasn't really designed to be put through. Going back to the unit itself, it's made from fairly durable ABS plastic. There is no controls in it apart from a large rotating dial at the top, which can also be pressed in, and then a smaller white button behind it. Apart from that, the only other kind of interface that you're going to see on it is a USB-C port at the back, used for charging and updating any firmware. And then at the front, there are 5 sort of sockets which allow the lights to be inserted and magnetically attach, and then push power through to the lights themselves. At the bottom of the unit, you will also find a 1/4-inch female socket that you can then use to attach the Adaptalux to just about anything. You can also attach this particular socket to the flash hot shoe mount that comes from Adaptalux if you want to mount the unit directly to the camera itself, but for the most part it's usually going to be mounted to like a tabletop tripod, another bigger tripod if you want to, or as I have done over here, it's attached to a Leofoto magic arm and then attached to the tripod itself. So included with the starter kit are these 2 basic white light arms, but there is a whole range of arms that you can purchase. There are super white bright lights. There are also multiple colors. There's red, green, orange, blue, I think. And then on top of that, you can also buy ultraviolet lights, which open up a whole new world of possibility in photographing things like flowers and other insects that also emit different kinds of reflections in the ultraviolet wavelength. These arms that come with the starter kit are the white wide beam lights that put out about 5,700 Kelvin at 200 lumens. So it's bright enough if you're going to be using slightly slower shutter speeds, but they're not super bright. They don't necessarily compete with the light that's put out from a flash gun, for instance. The arms themselves are all about 30 centimeters in length once you have them inserted inside the actual socket of the Adaptalux mount. And at the end of the light itself, you also have a rotating hood that can be screwed out to narrow the beam of light or to make it wider by screwing it in. The other useful thing about that, of course, is that if you take it out completely, you can even add a little bit of gel inside there. So you can change the color of the light if you want to, and put a 1/4 cut of orange or a magenta or any other kind of lighting that you would like to inside the light itself. Although, to be honest, that's a little bit of a faff because it is quite a long thread that you've got to get it on and off of. More importantly, at the end of each of the lights, there's another magnetic clip so that you can take one of the included cones, and there are 2 cones that come with the starter kit, and attach it to the end of your light to be able to soften and throw out a broader beam of light onto your subject. So it's actually quite useful. It's also quite nice when you're trying to backlight subjects and you want to just get a softer light around them. But in terms of the lights themselves, there are 4 different white light beams that you can buy as well. So you've got, and of course I don't have them all here, I just have the basic lighting kit. The beams themselves are the standard, which is just natural white light. Then you get cold white, warm white, and then super bright white, which puts out about 400 lumens of light rather than the 200 that you see here. So the primary advantage of LED lighting over flash lighting is that it is constant. This means that not only can you see what you're doing when you're actually putting the lighting into place, but importantly, you can change on the fly, and it's not guesswork. The other thing is that you can delve into the world of videography, which you can't do with the conventional flash gun. Now, because you've got the constant light, it means that you can see insects moving if you'd like to and create movies out of that. By having the constant light, when you're moving in towards insects, it actually almost habituates them to your presence. So you can move in a little bit closer. It doesn't throw off that light and startle them when you do photograph them with a flash gun, for instance. The other major advantage of LED, of course, is that because it is small, it is also massively economical. So as a result, this battery pack that they've got inside here will give you over an hour of filming or photography when you are at 100%. So you effectively don't need to have this huge rig. In the case of when I'm shooting with flash guns, I've got 2 large flash guns with multiple batteries. Now I've just got the small light rig, which is actually really easy to handhold, and it's going to work for a good hour to 2 hours if I'm going to turn the lights down a little bit. Of course, the downside is also the fact that it is a constant light source. It means that there is much less light that's being pushed out. The maths hurts my head a little bit when I think about it, but my old SB800 puts out light at 1,050th of a second and will produce a light burst that's something like 10 times as powerful as this light can produce. So obviously a flash gun is going to push out a lot more light, which means that you're not going to have anything like camera shake or movement inside your photographs. It's going to freeze the movement of the subject itself. Whereas this lighting kit, not so much the case, because you're going to have to be shooting with much slower shutter speeds. So there's going to be potential movement of the subjects when you're photographing them. The only way around this then is by basically opening up your aperture as much as possible, potentially lengthening your shutter duration and pushing your ISO up. It's not ideal, but at the same time there are advantages to being able to use the LED lights that flash just can't give you. So it's a little bit of 6 of one, half a dozen of another when you're creating your photograph. So how does the Adaptalux actually work? The idea is supposed to be really, really simple, and it's one of the reasons that they only have the 1 dial on top. Basically, it's an always-on system, which Adaptalux touts. So the minute you plug in one of the arms, it goes on, and that's how you switch off the light as well, by taking the arms out. Some people will like this, others won't. I'm not a huge fan of that myself, because I personally would like to be able to switch the lights on and off so that I can move in and about without draining the power from the battery itself. But for the most part, it does mean that it is really simple and you don't need to worry about pressing additional buttons and everything. Default mode is as you put the lights in, they go to 50% power. That's it, that's their standard setup. You can, of course, put the lights into sleep mode by holding and pressing the little white Bluetooth button at the back, and then the lights will switch off after about 8 to 10 seconds. Or you can also brighten up the lights, so let me switch those back on, and get to 100% by long pressing your rotating dial at the top, and you'll see the lights will suddenly brighten up. To adjust the brightness of the lights themselves, you are supposed to long press until you get a kind of pulse, and then use your dial to be able to get to full power or down from that. So in theory, it's supposed to be easy to adjust. As you can see, it's now doing this again. And then if you want to do another flash, you then have to press it again to go to the next lighting arm. Sounds complicated? That's because it is. Trying to adjust 5 lighting pods with just a single rotating dial is an exercise in frustration. Now I get it. The designers behind this are a group of lighting nerds, and I say this with affection. The team at Adaptalux are probably the kind of lighting nerds I would love to spend time with, talking about lighting and equipment and gear and understanding how to light subjects and the complications around it. But if you are a noob, or even just somebody who doesn't understand lighting in the same way that the designers have, this is complicated. It's not easy to use. The upside to all of this, though, is that the designers at Adaptalux have created one of the best phone apps that I've ever come across when it comes around to controlling and manipulating the lighting that you've got in front of you. So from the start, this is really a unit that is supposed to be controlled from the phone itself. Once you use the phone, you will quickly be able to see the output on each of the lights. There's a nice little toggle in the top right-hand corner that allows you to go to boost mode, which will use all of the power and double up the light once more. And just being able to adjust everything on the fly in a couple of seconds is so much easier using the phone than by using the interface on the unit itself. When I look at this unit, I think, don't use the unit on its own. That's just a fallback in case your phone battery has died, essentially. What you really want to do is have the phone next to you and use that to control the lighting unit itself. The app even allows you to save different kinds of settings and formats. There's a small downside there that in the app you can't actually build that when you're out in the field, because it requires you to have a photograph as a sort of template to see what the lighting control is. So if you're out in the field, you can't really save it. But it works so quickly and easily that I can set up my lighting right while I'm there. I'm not usually a fan of apps. I actually like being able to have just direct control of my units and everything. But for once, I actually think that this is the way to shoot, is by using this particular app that comes out with the Adaptalux. So yes, having more control of the units physically would be great, but that would no doubt drive up the cost and the complexity of the unit itself. Now, the starter pack usually costs between 230 to 270 British pounds. That'll give you the Adaptalux and then obviously the 2 arms with 2 pods at the end, or their little lighting cones. There are some tiny generic kind of LED lights that are cheaper, but they do not have the output or the control that this particular unit has. For what it represents, it actually is a really good price. And certainly if you look at some of the competition that does the same, it's often in the realm of 2 to sometimes 5 times more expensive. So Adaptalux have come out with a fairly affordable unit for what it's meant to do. Okay, so let's get down to the nitty-gritty, the actual working with the lights in the field itself. I've probably been a little bit unfair to Adaptalux, taking the unit out, using it handheld and photographing insects. This is something that their xenon flash units are designed to do, not necessarily these small little LED lights, but I wanted to see how it would fare if I were wanting to use this as a macro safari kind of lighting rig. If you take the time to set this up for static subjects like mushrooms and flowers, it's incredibly versatile and you're going to get phenomenal lighting results out of it. The harder part is photographing insects because they move. You can't necessarily get at them on a tripod. You're having to handhold and push your way in. That said, I was still able to manage decent handheld stacks for focus stacking and be able to get my lighting bright enough at around f8 to be able to do reasonably stable photographs at 125th of a second. Not always the case, but if you push your ISO up, and again with the stacking involved you're actually getting rid of some of that noise, it meant that I could actually photograph things like spiders and flies and other insects that would potentially jump away from one when you're photographing them. So you can actually use this unit when you're out there photographing the natural world. Of course, as I've mentioned before, this rig is not necessarily designed to be used in the outdoors photographing moving insects and bugs, but it does actually work for this. And for that, I've found it a very useful starting setup for somebody who's wanting to get slightly more creative lighting out of their macro photography. That said, I did find that the 2 arms weren't necessarily enough, and I have actually supplemented them from time to time using an additional LED light, usually as a backlight, which I could push further away. Of course, Adaptalux does give you the option to buy additional lights along with additional little mounting units so that you can get a 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th light even. away from your actual setup and the arm itself. So there's a whole lot more flexibility that you can add to the system simply by adding additional arms or additional units or controller units to your actual lighting rig itself. And if you take the time to set it up for a static subject, it is incredibly useful. And if you use the boost mode, it is also possible to do moving subjects like butterflies and moths and other kinds of insects that aren't necessarily going to be sitting still. For that kind of work, you can mount everything to a simple magic arm like I've done over here, and you're able to get your lights that much closer to your subject matter and be able to photograph the moving macro world. Something that's important to me is the ability to focus stack my images as well, and I was able to do this using the Adaptalux. And in fact, it makes hand holding that much easier in order to be able to create your focus stacks and get a much greater depth of field and sharpness to your images. The only downside to this, of course, is the limited light that comes from an LED light bulb like this means that you are going to be pushing your ISO up to be able to create those focus stacks. Still, it's possible, doable, I managed it. And of course, one of the advantages of having the LED light is that there is constant light source, so therefore your lighting doesn't fluctuate between the images itself, making stacking sometimes actually that much easier. At the end of the day, I put the Adaptalux through paces that, as I say, it wasn't necessarily designed to go through, and it handled it perfectly adequately, if not with aplomb. I actually think this is a really useful starting point if you're wanting to get into creative macro lighting photography. Now, Adaptalux did send me this unit free of charge. They didn't put me under any duress to say anything positive about the light. It's not going to push out as much light as some photographers would like to, but at the same time, it is actually really, really versatile and malleable, excuse the pun, when it comes around to lighting your photography. Of course, if you found this particular video useful, please remember to put a like and a subscribe in the various blocks around the screen. Your support goes a long way in enabling me to continue making videos like this. If you'd like to find out more about the Adaptalux, you can head over to their website, which is just over here at the bottom of the screen, and you can also purchase it directly from the Adaptalux website in the UK. And as far as I know, they ship around the world as well. If you are wanting to do more of the photography of insects and moving subjects, I actually urge you to try out the Adaptalux xenon flash bulbs, which work in exactly the same way as the LED lights themselves, except it's a little mini flash at the front of the lens. This gives you that much more power, but along with the added flexibility of the Adaptalux system. So the xenon flashes are probably the way to go. I don't have them on hand, unfortunately, over here, but they are available for purchase, and I can only assume that they're going to push out more power. The disadvantage to the xenon lights compared to this is obviously going to be a higher cost, and of course you don't see what you're getting in the viewfinder itself. So if you are starting out in macro photography and you want to see what you're doing with the lighting, as well as if you're shooting video, this is the way to go.